From APM, American Public Media.
Liberty Life, the pro-military paper, and audio articles from Kings Bay to Camp Blanding. Serves Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Marines. Liberty Life is available wherever the military, veterans, and their families gather. Online at libertylifemedia.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, our First Coast Week in Review panel of reporters tackles the biggest stories of the week. Among our topics, police and fire pensions are back despite the expense. A lawsuit is filed challenging the state's pushback on Amendment 4. Patients ebbs as floodwaters continue to impact homes. And students as young as 11 face arrest after a spate of school threats in several First Coast schools. We'll talk about all that and more with our panel of journalists. Then, Mocha Jax is seeking submissions from First Coast artists for an upcoming juried art exhibition. Join the conversation. You can reach us here on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email questions and comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And you can reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
I'm from NPR News in Washington. I'm Corva Coleman. Tens of thousands of unionized Boeing workers are on strike at factories in the Portland and Seattle areas. The Machinists Union held 2 votes yesterday. Members rejected a tentative contract and chose to strike immediately. The strike vote passed by 96%. Broderick Conway is a Boeing union worker.
We all want a better future, and in order to have that, we have to have better support in our company. And it goes the same for them. If they want a better future, they got to know that their workers are being supported properly.
The union rejected a wage increase of 25% and is maintaining its demand of a 40% wage jump. Boeing released a statement saying the message is clear and the company is ready to return to the bargaining table. A judge struck down North Dakota's near-total ban on abortion. The state is planning to appeal. NPR's Kristen Wright reports the decision is the latest turn in the nation's fight over abortion access.
A state judge decided North Dakota's constitution protects a woman's right to choose, the judge writing that prior to viability, a woman must retain the ultimate control over her own destiny, her own body, and ultimately the path of her life. The ruling is in stark contrast to the U.S. Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade 2 years ago. The judge in North Dakota cited the Dobbs case, writing, "This court sees no reason to do the same." The court called the state's abortion restrictions vague and threatening to state constitutional protections for patients and doctors. Abortion could still be difficult to obtain in North Dakota. Its only provider moved to neighboring Minnesota and filed the lawsuit to overturn the ban. The state's attorney general says he's appealing. Kristen Wright, NPR News.
Election officials across the U.S. are raising concerns about potential delays in the processing and delivery of mail-in ballots and other election mail this fall. As NPR's Hansi Lo Wang reports, tens of millions of voters are expected to use the Postal Service to cast their votes in coming weeks.
In a letter to Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, the National Associations of Secretaries of State and State Election Directors flagged concerns that the U.S. Postal Service's internal watchdog also recently raised, including workers not always following the proper procedures for handling mail-in ballots, voter registration applications, and other election mail. Some election officials in multiple states say they've received hundreds of ballots 10 days or more after the postmark. In response, spokesperson Martha Johnson says in a statement that the USPS will work on promptly addressing those concerns. The Postal Service is urging voters who are planning to vote by mail to return their completed ballots early and stop by a post office if they want to make sure their ballots get postmarked. Hansi Lo Wang, NPR News.
The 2 main presidential candidates will be campaigning today. Former President Donald Trump is in California. He'll hold a press conference at his Los Angeles golf course this morning. Later, he'll hold a rally in Las Vegas. Vice President Kamala Harris is going back to Pennsylvania today. She will make a brief stop in Johnstown, then she'll go to a rally that is set for Wilkes-Barre. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
At 4 minutes after 9, this is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters yesterday announced the arrest of police officer Brian Housand in Nassau County. Housand was charged with kidnapping with a firearm, aggravated stalking, and written threats to kill. The arrest warrant indicates the alleged victim is a woman he was previously in a relationship with. Waters says the officer had some issues at his department.
There's been a few situations that he dealt with in internal affairs. It didn't rise to the level of termination at this point. We'll have that information for you. But like I said, this is very unfortunate, very disturbing. And I'm just glad that we were able to take some action now.
Housand is suspended without pay, and Waters says he will be fired eventually. Housand is the 13th Jacksonville Sheriff's Office employee to be arrested this year. And a former Flagler County Fire Rescue paramedic is in jail charged with sexually assaulting an unconscious woman in a county rescue vehicle nearly 3 years ago. The Flagler County Sheriff's Office says the victim was being transported to a Palm Coast hospital. A video recorded in the ambulance and found on James Melody's cell phone showed her unconscious and unaware of being attacked. Showers and thunderstorms, especially around 11 and also at 3 today. Temperatures in the mid-80s, a northeast wind.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Simon & Schuster, publisher of The Highest Calling, Conversations on the American Presidency by David Rubenstein, featuring interviews with American presidents, historians, and journalists. Available wherever books are sold.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and on this Friday the 13th, it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, Jacksonville agrees to reinstate costly pension plans for first responders. The Jacksonville fights Florida's proposed abortion amendment on the web and at voter doorsteps. Citywide flooding forecasts climate-impacted weather to come. And a police crackdown on threats of school violence lands students as young as 11 in jail. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by First Coast News anchor and reporter Jasmine Monroe. Hi, Jasmine.
Good morning, Ann. Good morning, everyone.
Also joined by Claire Goforth, attorney and investigative reporter at the Daily Dot. Hi, Claire.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Columnist for USA Today Network and the Florida Times-Union, Nate Monroe.
Good morning, Ann.
Good morning. And Ann Maxwell, just under the wire, arriving investigative reporter at News4Jax.
Morning. Thanks for having me. San Marco train sat on the tracks. I hope it's not there anymore. Just heads up to you folks in San Marco.
The train. Always the train. Claire, I want to start with these recent arrests that we mentioned. Following this lethal shooting in Georgia, there have been these high-profile arrests announced by JSO, the state attorney's office, and the superintendent. So catch us up on what happened, who was involved, and what the outcome was.
So there have been 5 students ranging in age from 11 to 16 who have made a variety of threats, bomb threats, shooting threats, and things like that online. And sheriff is trying to signal that they're taking it very seriously. I mean, in the wake of so many school shootings, most memorably in recent times, the shooting in Georgia, that, they have a zero tolerance for this. And I think we all can agree that protecting children in our schools is paramount. It's of such importance. But then you have to also consider the fact that you're potentially incarcerating children for words that they wrote online. Mm-hmm. And do they have the understanding of how serious those words are? What else is going on in these kids' lives? I think that many students who are that young, 11, 12, 13 years old, were a few of them, do they actually mean this? Do they understand the gravity of what they're saying? Yes, they shouldn't be saying it, but it's hard to say that a 12-year-old really means it when they say something of that nature online. Yeah, as horrible as it can be.
Jasmine, I mean, kids spend so much of their life online right now, and there is something of an environment online that fosters a little bit of talking out of turn, out of school, doing sort of some brash talking.
I think even with the gaming systems, what is it called?
Just
GTA or it's the shooting game that they have. It's hard to see, of course, both sides of the fence when it comes to that. A kid just thinking 11 years old saying something that you don't mean. Think about how many times you said when you were younger something you don't mean. But words matter now, and I feel like everyone is having conversations with their children now, so you know how extreme that is when you were posting that or you're saying something like that. But I do want to mention the shooting that happened in Georgia. They talked about that young man's home, inside of his home, and what it looked like, and the type of living style that he was living. It wasn't conducive to what a child should be living in. So it's just something to say. Teachers should be paying attention. You should be sending up those red flags and talking about Putnam County. They're arming their teachers or guardians in those schools. I think it's important. I think we don't have time to waste anymore. Every minute counts when it comes to school shootings.
And the superintendent chose to join this presentation by the sheriff's office and kind of offer this solidarity with this effort. He's a new superintendent. How successful is that messaging, do you think, when you have somebody from the schools also joining this very high-profile arrest announcement?
I think it shows he's taking it seriously, which I think is a welcome sign for parents, that he's involved, that he's staying abreast of what's going on. So, I think that is a sign of transparency on his part and involvement. And, I think that is a positive thing that he's getting involved.
Nate, I think back to when the current state attorney, Melissa Nelson, kind of didn't begin running, but sort of was in the news because of the arrest of a very young boy, this kind of baby-faced kid who'd killed essentially a sibling, Christian Fernandez. I don't remember how old he was. I think he was 12. Yeah. So anyway, I guess just to point out that, this state attorney's office has in the past been, I think, more sympathetic to trying to not charge children. But in this case, I guess just viewing this as too serious or strong enough, wanting to make a strong enough statement about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Claire brought up some good points about there being an understandable concern about prosecuting children and prosecuting children for things that they have written online. We live in a world where it's easy to just write crazy stuff online. We all see it every day. But I also think this is kind of the rare situation where I do extend some benefit of the doubt to the public officials here, because they are making a very difficult call. I don't know how you don't address threats like this. You certainly can't do nothing. And so I don't envy them. And I don't envy Melissa Nelson's office in sort of figuring out how to handle these cases going forward. I do think it's more fraught than just, prosecuting them like they're adults or something. I mean, it is a legitimately tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough situation. I would guess, Claire, that this is going to send a strong message, though, to parents and to kids to see these arrests as opposed to just maybe a suspension or possibly expulsion.
It will, to the parents who are listening. But like we saw in Georgia, from the circumstances there and in other school shooting cases around the country, oftentimes these are not the children who have engaged parents. These are not the children who have a family support system to get them the care that they need if they're struggling with mental health issues or bullying or any of a number of things. So yes, it's going to send a strong message to some parents if they are checked in and they're paying attention, and to the students themselves. It's just that, I mean, they're kids, and we live in this online world. We all have you ever opened your message requests on now X, formerly Twitter, and seen the kind of things that people say online? There's this sort of idea that many of us have that there's just impunity for the things that you type out and hit send on.
Yeah. We're talking about the week's biggest headlines with our panel of journalists. I'm here with Nate Monroe, Jasmine, Monroe, Ann Maxwell, and Claire Goforth. And we invite you to join the conversation. You can reach us at 904-549-2937. You can also send email comments or questions to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about some news that's continuing to creep out over the last couple of weeks about Amendment 4. So, Ann, this is a story that you've been covering, partly about a state agency that's created a website addressing Amendment 4, and then also some additional information that's emerged about voters who signed a petition in support of Amendment 4. So catch us up on what's happening.
So Amendment 4 is the abortion amendment that voters are going to decide on in November, and it basically prohibits the government from making laws to interfere with abortion before viability, or if it would interfere with the mother's health. And so as polls show, it has pretty strong support. It would need 60% to pass. But polls indicate, it could be a tight race for that. So ACA, which is the Agency for Healthcare Administration, I believe is the full title. And so they're a state agency, and they do things like put out, health PSAs. They administer, managed healthcare plans for people. And so they put up a webpage last week about Amendment 4, saying that things like it would harm women's health, and the current law protects it. Talks about the language being vague, the terms viability, health, healthcare provider, and it has this like long laundry list of those things. And so there's also a radio ad and a TV spot, I believe, playing on public broadcast stations that ACA has also put out. And so the group that sponsored the amendment actually just filed a lawsuit yesterday saying this is the improper use of state funds, a state government agency, to campaign against this amendment, and they're putting out misinformation, and they're asking the court to basically force them to stop doing that.
And so ACA, Claire, in addition to the work that it does as a regulatory agency, does oversee abortion clinics in the state. They're saying in their language, don't let the fear mongers lie to you. Florida is already protecting life, and basically suggesting that the current circumstance, that disparaging the current law, which is this, abortion that limits basically, to 6
weeks. Yeah,
6
it's
weeks,
a
yeah.
ban after 6 weeks with some narrow exceptions. And, they claim that the exceptions are sufficient to safeguard the health of women and girls. But then we have women all over the state, just a few that have come forward, and we don't even know how many there were, who have sought care under horrible circumstances and been denied it and almost lost their lives. Some of them have lost their ability to reproduce. And it's because doctors, medical care providers are terrified of going to prison. I mean, we have a Florida resident right now who many believe is running for president out of a desire to avoid prison. People do not want to go to prison, particularly not medical care providers who are doing their jobs. But, it's an impossible situation when you're the woman and you go and you're miscarrying or you have some horrible fetal abnormality, but it doesn't rise to the level that maybe this particular hospital believes is high enough to provide you with the care that you need. I mean, there was a woman who went through a 19-day miscarriage. She bled for 19 days because she couldn't get care. Just so many horrible stories, women ending up in ICU when it's simply in the past they would have gone and they would have gotten a DNC, dilation, I can't remember the second word, but
Curettage, I think.
yeah, curettage. And now, because the state has involved itself, we passed that law, and now ACA is saying we protect life, which is politically charged language anyway. There are a lot of people who find themselves in a very impossible situation that threatens their very lives.
Jasmine, it is the language, I think, that has brought this to, before critics. One of the things saying that we need to keep Florida from becoming an abortion tourism destination state. The concern there being that sort of echoes the language of people who traditionally oppose abortion rights. It's kind of the language of the pro-life movement. But the governor says that this is not electioneering. He says this is simply just public information, as they would issue a PSA about any number of subjects.
I think either way, it's something. This is just tough to say. Just being, a journalist on air, you can't really speak on this. But, personally, for my thoughts, I just think it's the research that you have to do, and when you're looking at something like this, what Claire just mentioned, it's heartbreaking what women have to go through when it comes to miscarrying and continuing on with a pregnancy. I try not to speak on this one.
All right. Nate, you came out with a column today talking about this, also talking about another case that's going to go before the Florida Supreme Court. So the litigation here is being on two tracks, right? There's a lawsuit that was filed in Leon County by people who, supported the abortion amendment, got it on the ballot. And then there's this request by an attorney in Palm Beach asking the Florida Supreme Court to weigh in with a couple of writs that he filed, basically requiring some instantaneous processing and decision making.
Right, and the Supreme Court granted that request on an expedited basis. So I mean that's been fast tracked. There is a reason that the governor is insistent that this charged language ACA is using is a public service announcement, and that's because there is a state statute, not surprisingly, that says public officials in Florida should not and cannot use their official powers to influence the outcome of an election. And the problem for the governor is he can call this a public service announcement. The language ACA is using in its advertisements and on its website is electioneering. This is campaign language, telling people that Amendment 4 threatens women's health, listing out-of-state groups that support Amendment 4 and casting aspersions on those groups. That is campaign language. It is unambiguously campaigning and asking people to not support Amendment 4. It just is. A public service announcement is telling people there's like a tornado warning in their neighborhood. It's not telling them that an issue on the ballot in November is going to make them less safe. And so, the Supreme Court is going to have to decide how far it's going to let DeSantis go before it constrains him. This really is unambiguously a case of the governor deciding that there is a law in the books he does not need to follow. It really is that simple.
This is a Florida Supreme Court that is largely appointed by this governor, though, Nate. How does that figure into, their decision making? I mean, it's worth noting that they did previously allow this somewhat controversial cost assessment of Amendment 4 to be placed on the ballot that allows for the inclusion of potential lawsuit costs.
The court also, though, a divided 4-3 court did allow the abortion amendment on the ballot in the first place. And that was a decision that DeSantis has been highly critical of. And frankly, these efforts to undermine the ballot initiative feel a bit of like a reaction to that decision in some ways. DeSantis has appointed 5 of the 7 members of the Supreme Court. They share his conservative legal philosophy. There's no doubt about that. They have in previous cases signaled that they share his very maximalist view of executive power. They view the governor as a powerful official who can do lots of things like remove elected prosecutors from office. I think this case goes further than that, though. I mean, this really is, again, there is a law in the books that says that what is happening cannot happen. And the justices are just going to have to decide, like, how far is too far. I think DeSantis has put his ideological allies on the court in an uncomfortable position.
We're talking about the week's big headlines, and we're taking your calls and questions at 904-549-2937. We're also checking emails. If you want to send us a question or a comment, you can reach out at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Claire, I want to ask you about some of the politics. The abortion, the current restriction, the 6-week abortion ban, as it sometimes is called, was something that he signed into law while he was still running for president. He, kind of in a show of support for it, flew down in the middle of his campaign to sign it into law immediately. And so he invested some political capital in that law, in that restriction. Is there a sense that plays into what's happening currently?
Well, certainly. I mean, he probably views the abortion amendment as a rebuke of that particular move. He's been sending those election cops to people's homes who signed the petition, and investigating them for voter fraud, basically. And it's really worth noting about this abortion ban. And one of the things that the state has said and ACA says on their website is that it's sufficient to protect the people who have been raped or the pregnancy as a result of incest, or to protect the life and health of the mother, or human trafficking is another one. But here's the thing, in reality, in the real world, when you have been through one of these horrifying situations, how do you prove that you were raped if you didn't report it at the time, as a majority of rapes are not reported? How do you
And prove it in 6 weeks.
improve it? Well, no, you can do it beyond 6 weeks if it is under those narrow exceptions. But how do you prove it before viability? I mean, you have to go through the court system. You're 18, 19 years old, or any age really, and now you have to go deal with the courts potentially to prove that this horrible thing happened to you. And 8 weeks after the fact, good luck. And to prove incest, I mean, that could be an invasive medical procedure. To prove human trafficking, I mean, how are you going to prove these things? So people who are in those situations, who should technically be able to terminate a pregnancy based on those exceptions, are very unlikely to actually be able to access that health care.
Well, and it does raise the question of, how someone that's pregnant and a victim of incest, must approach that situation, certainly, because reporting can be really a difficult situation, dicey in a family dynamic.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, a survivor of that could be worried about their own safety. They could be a minor. A lot of murky waters there. And like Claire mentioned, it's a really short amount of time to make these really big decisions. The exception for rape, incest, human trafficking allows abortions up to 15 weeks. So, I mean, you've got like a little more than 3 months to figure all that out and find a provider who feels like the evidence or whatever is strong enough that they're not going to be put in prison. That's tough.
Yeah. So, Nate, this lawsuit that was filed in Leon County, they're seeking basically injunctive relief. I mean, they want, I guess, these ads to stop. What is being done in terms of the signature verification process, the people going to check whether somebody actually signed the petition in support?
I mean, there is a little bit of mystery about this. It is apparent that the state is on kind of a fishing expedition to look for fraud in the signing of these petitions. And the organizers behind Amendment 4 had to get hundreds of thousands of people to sign petitions to get it on the ballot. And they got more than they needed. Again, we're talking, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these things. They have been verified by the various supervisors of elections throughout Florida. The deadline to challenge the validity of these petitions has long passed. Again, the Supreme Court greenlit this thing going on the ballot. And so it's very difficult to kind of understand what the state's great and urgent interest is now in trying to find fraud, to the point where they are sending armed officers to people's homes who have signed petitions to question them about it. That is an extreme step to take, and it seems like the state has done that based on very little actual evidence of fraud. I think critics, not unreasonably, view this as the governor using another kind of arm of state power to undermine this amendment. This is, again, beyond campaigning. The governor is free to campaign against this. What he's should not be free to do is use the organs of state government to undermine it. I mean, I guess now in the state of Florida, if you support an issue and want to get it on the ballot and it's something the governor doesn't like, I mean, you might be dealing with officers interrogating you in the future. I find it a chilling development.
Yeah, Jasmine, this election police force was created by the governor. It's been used previously. But I would guess in some issues, for instance, if you're signing in support of, say, the marijuana petition, there might be some questions about, people being concerned about supporting something that currently is illegal, right?
Yeah.
What is the community sense about, this door knocking that's happening, or the existence of the election police force?
I mean, I think it doesn't even have to be about abortion or marijuana. It could just be about your view, period, or who you're going to vote for. Election fraud is a thing, but I don't think everyone is doing it. And I think using armed officers to knock on your door, that backs you in a corner. And sometimes you may not vote, or, depending on which way you are voting, it may sway your vote on what you need to do. And I think that's why they're doing it. It's something that they talked about in the beginning of the year. It's like the fear. There's going to be a lot of fear this year, and they're going to be pushing it, whether that's from the Democrats or the Republicans or independents. You have to do your diligence, do your research, and, take a stance. And you can't be apologetic about that stance either, just because, people are backing you into a corner.
Claire, I mean, we should be clear, there is very little evidence of voter fraud anywhere.
Exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
And yet we have an entire election police force.
Yeah.
That was a political move. Let's be honest, it was a political move. And the majority of the people who were arrested under that, most of whom voted incorrectly, believing they had satisfied their fines and fees after a felony conviction, were black men. That is also true. And just the thought that someone who is exercising their constitutional right to express their voice in a democratic process by signing a ballot initiative that the governor may not like, or to vote, just to merely vote, could have the police show up. One of the gentlemen who had this happen to him said they had a whole folder about him, who had signed the abortion petition because he supported it. And, most of us don't have that many interactions with police. I realize that they are doing the job they are mandated to do, but aren't there more pressing issues, more issues with crime in Florida? More violence and things of that nature that we could be investigating, rather than, I don't know if this signature really does look like the John Smith that lives at, Park Place Way or whatever.
Well, I mean, election integrity obviously is paramount as well, right? To make sure that nobody is defrauding the system. But I think that there was question, Anne, about whether the number of signatures being examined would have tilted the balance in terms of whether they met the threshold anyway.
I'm not super familiar with that point, but there are checks in place before a petition like this is approved. The supervisors of elections have to go through the signatures, I believe, and then the Florida Supreme Court, as the ACLU pointed out in their lawsuit, they're the ones who looked at everything and said, this is fine, go ahead, put it on the ballot.
Yeah. I want to shift gears and talk about pensions that have been reinstated. And if you want to join the conversation, you can call us at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Nate, this is an issue that you've covered over many years, but I mean, it's a story that's so old it's new again. So pensions are back. Remind us why we took them away in the first place and why they're making a resurgence.
Oh, gosh. So our previous mayor, Lenny Curry, fairly early on in his first term, set out to kind of on this big, high-profile pension reform campaign, and there were a lot of elements to it. But one of the sort of upshots of that reform effort was he eliminated pensions for new hires for police and firefighters, and actually all city employees, and replaced them with a 401A plan, public sector 401K. And that was a generous plan. The city, for police and firefighters, matches quite a bit of your 12 to 20% of pay. It's not an inexpensive plan. But the public safety unions at the time then, and I guess to some degree have been vindicated now, were concerned that the lack of a pension plan was going to make retention and recruitment of talent very difficult.
Because it would be unique kind of in this.
It would be unique. I mean, Jacksonville at the time, and I think this is probably still the case today, it was one of the only major cities to not offer pensions in the entire country. And so it certainly made Jacksonville an outlier in that sense. And within Florida, you can most municipalities and counties offer either a localized pension plan or the Florida retirement system, which is the state pension plan. And so the public safety unions this time around made their pitch to a new mayor, and Donna Deegan was very receptive to this. So the idea is police officers and firefighters are going to have the option in the future to enroll in the Florida retirement system. That is an enormously expensive proposition for the city. That pension, that future pension option is being complemented by substantial pay raises for police officers, corrections officers, and firefighters as well. This is a huge amount of money. I think one public safety official referred to it as these are kind of golden handcuffs in a way, and there are a lot of ways you can interpret that term, but this is going to be a real challenge for the city.
And this is, I mean, we should be clear, there already is an enormous pension debt that exists of
Yes.
several $3 billion or something, right? That the city is already struggling to pay for on an annual basis.
Yes, the city has its old pension that the former mayor closed, still has an enormous unfunded liability. So it doesn't have, there are not enough assets in the pension plan to cover the future payouts that have to be made. That debt is in the billions of dollars. It gets worse. The city is, for some complicated reasons that are not worth getting into, the city has been underpaying what it really should be paying into that pension system. And so that bill gets bigger, and the city is going to be paying that off, when we are elderly citizens. Jacksonville's still going to be paying that old pension debt.
We've got a call from Taylor at the Beaches. Good morning, Taylor. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I've been trying to highlight this issue as a public employee. The state of Florida currently, right now, Florida retirement system, as far as I know, definitely as I know, the system I'm under, and probably the one that Ms. Deegan just implemented, a retirement system was originated for longevity, meaning people work there a certain amount of years and they receive benefits. Nowadays, these systems are strictly based on age, which is creating, and I hate to say the words because nobody wants to hear it. When news reporters do the thing on UPS, it's a two-tiered system. When it's the government, you can call it two-tiered or whatever you want. It's a system of separate and unequal. And I'd like to draw a through line as to how somebody who makes sure you have fresh water to drink every day, is not only being discriminated against. I have the proof. I have the evidence. No reporter's here to hear it. I don't know if this is whistleblowing or what, but you have management receiving benefits after 10 and 20 years. But an 18-year-old cop protecting my son at school right now does not have that right.
Thanks, Taylor. Nate, explain to us a little bit about what that two-tiered system means. I mean, that's basically for people who have more tenure, that they are eligible for a bigger chunk of benefits.
I'm going to be fully honest. I'm not familiar enough with the Florida retirement system to offer a very cogent analysis of that phone call. I just cannot.
Philosophically speaking, Claire, is this embrace of pensions showing any kind of political intent on the part of the mayor? I mean, it's interesting that the former Republican mayor was the one that sort of got rid of the pensions with the support at the time of the FOP. The FOP didn't support this current mayor, but she's returning them pensions.
Yeah, it is interesting to see. I believe that Donna Deegan is taking a centrist approach as mayor, and by giving the police and fire more money in their budgets, and then this is a way to signal that I'm not the leftist, the big bad evil liberal leftist that people like to characterize Democrats as. When Lenny Curry got rid of the pension, he had a lot of support. And Nate is right. It is a huge drain on city resources for many reasons. And part of that are the pension holidays that they took so they could just spend money freely in years past. But at the same time, if we're the only large city in Florida, or one of the very few around the country that doesn't have a pension program, it does make it harder to recruit talent. It makes it harder to keep talent. There are so many people I have heard from who say that police come here, they get there, they get trained,
Go to Orlando.
Yep, they get trained up, they do the job for a few years, and then they move somewhere that pays more. I mean, they're getting a bump from, what is it, like 48 to 65,000 starting pay from 52 to 65,000. That's a significant
It's going
amount
to
of
cost the
money.
city an enormous amount of money to do all of this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
for,
is.
that's for officers, and corrections officers will be moving to $60,000 a year. But Anne, they really did have, I think, a demonstrable deficit in terms of people applying to be corrections officers, and we're having some trouble staffing the jail.
Yeah, it's a tough job. Several corrections officers have been arrested, in recent years. It's tough. I don't think they have air conditioning in there. I mean, it's a really hard job, and so I think a pay raise, is something that is a tool to help recruit people, retain them.
I think they mentioned basically if they didn't do this, they would have lost 500 officers out on the street.
Interesting.
Wow. And, that's significant.
I was in the jail recently. I feel like it was air conditioned
Oh,
when I
is
was
it?
in there.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm not,
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
that
my
it is,
bad.
but it is a difficult place to work. Some floors, Jasmine, they're treating people that are basically kind of almost in a detox state. They're having been arrested in a crisis very often,
Right.
and so it is a difficult population. It's not an easy job.
It's not. I mean, if you're working out of jail, sometimes people compare it like you're in jail to yourself. You have the freedoms, of course, but you're in a dark facility with people who are looked at in a certain specific way sometimes. But I don't know. Thinking about this in fair and equal pay. I can't remember right now the community organization that we spoke with First Coast News, who mentioned, this is going to suffer for communities. This money could have went to communities and not to officers. But for me personally, being in Jacksonville and being so new to Jacksonville, not having 500 officers on the street is significant.
I'd like to know where they got that figure, though. I mean, did they just pull it out of the air? How do they know 500? I mean,
Well, yeah, they do know. I mean, I think that they have seen a decline in the number of applicants.
I'm
I've
sure
heard,
that is quantifiable.
yeah, and I think also, firefighters have said a number of times publicly that instead of having a pool to choose from, that they're basically hiring pretty much
Whatever
everybody
they
that's applying because
And
they
that's-
need that.
I mean, you can't have that. You're basically taking whatever you can.
We had a comment from Julie on X. She says the governor is violating people's civil rights by sending officers to interrogate people who sign petitions. He's abridging voters' First Amendment rights to express their views and to freely associate with others. His door-to-door Gestapo chills free speech and intimidating voters. Also, an email from Felicia. She says, "I read that a whistleblower was fired because he reported that DeSantis ordered land." So this is the DEP situation where the state parks were being eyed for some golf courses and some improvements, part of this Great Outdoors initiative. And that employee that leaked that information was ultimately fired. But Nate, there was a development in that case that we haven't talked about on this show, that his personnel file was released by the state, and nobody had asked for it, which is kind of interesting. I mean, anybody that's done public records requests.
Are they going to go after the leaker of that information? Yeah, I mean, again, this is a governor who has in myriad ways telegraphed that he is fine using state power to punish critics, to make things happen, whether they're legal or not. I mean, that's just, we have seen example after example of it, and it feels like as we get closer to November, he is just like really almost daring judges to stop him at this point.
I want to move on and talk about something that has been kind of in our face every day, including this morning. There's a lot of rain in the forecast. A lot of people, Jasmine, impacted by these recent rains and flooding. And, this has been occasionally torrential rains, but it's not a tropical system we're talking about here. It's just a stalled front.
Yeah. I think today marked 11 days or 10 days. I'm not quite sure, but 11 days straight rain, trees falling because of the ground still moist and wet. This school, Jacksonville School of Autism, an amazing school. I don't know if you've ever been there or drove past there. The teachers there are incredible. The work that they do, work that teachers literally can't do in other schools because they're trained for this. the kids in this school, autistic, have a routine. They lost their school basically due to the flooding and the sewer system backing up with the amount of rain that we received over the past 10 to 11 days. So they recently, I think it was $100,000 worth of flooring is what they received in this building, and it's a complete loss. So they do have, I do want people to know that, there's money and donations. There's an organization, the Davis family. It's the Flounder Pounder Fishing Tournament. And I know all Floridians love to fish. This is something that you can help out with. These kids, just think about it. If you know anyone who has a child who's autistic or a family member who's autistic, they literally thrive off of routine. So taking them out of a routine for even a day can, stunt their growth, their learning.
Yeah. And they've been scattered to a bunch of different
Yeah.
schools in the interim until the school is repaired. But this is one, Claire, of 21 reported sewage treatment, system overflows just since the 4th of September. So JEA is clearly getting, overwhelmed a little bit by these floodwaters. They're, go into the system that's not really meant to absorb all of that runoff in addition to treating sewage.
I mean, I've lived in Jacksonville for almost 20 years now, and I've sort of been through some hurricanes, tropical storms, weather events, and I have never seen anything like this. The flooding, the amount of flooding, the sustained flooding that we're seeing around the city, it's definitely not what the system is built to handle. And the question on some minds is our climate changes and we have more of these severe weather events. What do we need to do to harden our infrastructure as a city to prepare for the inevitability of more weather events like this?
I was asking Mayor Deegan this week, Nate, about whether there's going to have to be some changes just to the way that we manage events like this. I was asking specifically about no wake zones in neighborhoods where people are actually posting no wake zones, particularly San Marco, because that creates a huge amount of extra damage as those waters are pushed into homes.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a step back for a moment. We were talking about pensions and pay and the amount of money that's going to cost the city. The city also, of course, is investing an enormous amount of money in renovating the stadium. There have been lots of discussions about a jail. That's not going to be a cheap thing. My concern for the Deegan administration and for the city, she is a mayor who cares a lot about resilience, cares about climate change, and is very concerned about the impact that's going to have on Jacksonville. Resilience in a city of this size with the amount of coastline we have is like $1 billion question. Where's that money going to come from? Like, there is no more big ticket money left. In the absence of some new revenue, i.e., some sort of tax increase, like, how is the city going to move the needle meaningfully on something like that with the obligations that we already have very early into this, this new mayor's term?
Got a call from Mark on the south side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I was just curious about something that happened this week. There was a story in the news about the firemen that were awarded a settlement as a result of responding to a fire on a cargo ship out at Blunt Island, I believe. And, some of them were injured and all that good stuff. And I understand they got, I think it was like $16 million. And they found that the shipping company was negligent in the storage of some batteries or something along those lines. My question is, what happens if the firemen respond to my house and a fire was started because I laid a towel on top of a space heater? And I was negligent. I was negligent. I caused a fire and some fireman was injured. Does this kind of open up Pandora's box for public servants to be able to seek recourse for injuries, damages as a result of them just doing their job? I mean, I certainly feel for the firemen, but I just kind of wondered, what are the repercussions of that decision earlier this week?
Thanks, Mark. It's kind of an interesting question. Obviously, this was a maritime law. It was kind of a landmark law interpretation, I guess, Claire, because previously you weren't allowed to sue a company like this for these type of allegations. But I guess they were saying that they didn't cap these batteries. They were transporting wrecked vehicles. And there was a number of other complaints, I think, that they had that they didn't. The fire alarm wasn't working.
The fire alarm wasn't turned back on after the cargo was loaded, and they also said that the ship's captain and crew didn't speak English, so they didn't know to call 911, couldn't tell the firefighters where the fire was.
Right. And so this was a huge settlement for them, a number of years in the making, and but one that is probably not going to be enormously consequential in terms of other incidents on the water. I mean, it's
That's a good question that caller had. I'm not sure if it just applies to, corporations where there are clearly, in this case, apparently policies that weren't followed, things like that. It'd be hard to imagine it applying to everybody who, drops a cigarette and starts a fire.
Leaves a
Who
candle
knows?
lit,
Yeah,
right?
right.
But there are laws that already that are provide for the state to get money from private citizens who create a dangerous situation for themselves, daredevils or whatever, and have to be rescued. So there's somewhat a precedent there.
Well, Claire Goforth, Jasmine Monroe, Nate Monroe, and Maxwell, thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate you.
Congaree and Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
On the next Florida Roundup, there are almost 250,000 electric vehicles registered in the state. With demand increasing, so is the need for charging stations. The state has tens of millions of dollars from the federal government earmarked toward the goal of putting in fast charging stations. So what's your experience with charging stations if you drive an EV? Have you thought about buying one but have gotten charging anxiety? Email us radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Join us Friday noon until 1.
On stage,
With a variety of exhibits, but also a push to bring new artists into the fold. Joining me to talk about this call for artists is Ylva Rouse, Senior Curator for the Museum of Contemporary Art, Jacksonville. Hi, Ylva.
Good morning. Nice to be here with you.
Nice to have you here. So what is Jax Contemporary, this art exhibition that you're going to help curate?
So we are making an open call to artists here in Jacksonville.
Jacksonville and all of the surrounding counties, right?
Yes, exactly. The greater Jacksonville. So I can test my knowledge of all the counties. But it's all this 7 of them. Yeah. That includes San Augustine.
Yeah. And so it's a triennial exhibition. So every 3 years. When has it occurred in the past? This is
the first time.
This is the first. Okay.
I'm really excited. I've been wanting to do it for a very long time. I wanted to shine a light on the thriving arts community here that we don't get much chance to expose our community to.
And so you're basically throwing it open to anybody on the First Coast area who is an artist who wants to submit something?
Right. So they have to be over 18 and have a proven trajectory as artists.
So what does that mean?
That means they can't be students.
Okay.
We have other opportunities for students, as you know, at the museum. But we're looking for the artist out there.
Yeah. And so is this all mediums? Like, is this just visual art, or are you doing performance art? Or are you doing auditory art?
Well, it's open to all arts media. So I'm excited to see what comes in, but that essentially means the classical arts, visual arts media.
Yeah, and so you're going to be the chief curator, right?
Yes, although I am bringing in a curator from the Museum of North Miami, the Museum of Contemporary Art in North Miami. I'm very excited. Adese Wilford. And once the finalists are selected, through this open call, we'll be doing studio visits together.
Okay. So you do a studio visit. What does that mean for an artist to get a studio visit? Are you talking to them are you giving them advice?
Yes, among other things. So a studio visit is a very important. I really wanted to have an important professional component to this whole event. So it's giving them advice and principally selecting the work for the exhibition together. So discuss their practice and so on.
And so you say that there's going to be finalists. Are the finalists going to be displayed in some fashion or just the
Yes,
winner?
absolutely. So this is Jax Contemporary will be an exhibit that goes up end of March next year.
Okay.
So the call we just opened the open call. There's an application and submission rules on our website. That will be open through October 11. And what the artists do is they submit their work, 3 samples of the work.
3 samples.
It doesn't have to be the work that we will ultimately show in the exhibition, right? And then we'll make the selection from all the submissions for the finalists that will then get the opportunity to participate in the exhibition, Jax Contemporary.
And so what do you look for when you're choosing an artist that you think has some merit?
Well, the exciting thing about this open call is that you really don't know what's going to come in. I mean, it'll be exciting to see what's there.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what are you hearing from the art community now that you've kind of announced this open call?
Oh, there's great excitement. It's really exciting, and in fact, the Jax Contemporary is being sponsored by Dolph James, who is an artist here in town, has been
well-known artist here.
Well known, yeah. So we're really pleased and honored. But yes, most of the artists say, "Oh, we've been waiting for this opportunity for a very long time."
So what do you think artists, just briefly, what should they consider before they make their submissions?
Well, they should consider how do they want to be presented or represented. You know, there's the case of some artists that use a lot of different media, but this is a group show, so it's a difficult choice, right? What represents you? How do you want to be represented in a group show?
Well, the all call is open now. It opened the 9th and it'll close October 11th. We'll post the link on our website.
Yes, please.
All right. Ilva, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thanks.
And that's our program. We encourage you to send your feedback or suggestions to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Don't forget to listen Saturday at 4 when neurologist Dr. Joe Servin delves into racial bias in medicine and gut health. Then join us Monday when we preview a community discussion on social media regulations called TikTok on Trial.
To building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
ServPro, independently owned and operated. Whether it's water, mold, or fire damage, they'll help you restore your home or business. ServPro is available 24/7. ServPro, helping to make it like it never even happened.
This is WJCT